everybody. So, I've been exploring this fascinating question, I think, about what protects us more, guns or flowers. Um, and it's fascinating because I think it poses this question of like what us actually means. Like, um, if on the one hand we apply the prevailing empirical, objective, rational perspective, obviously guns protect us better. Uh, but that's to define us in a way in this very reductive way, um, so that what's getting protected is just sheer like physical survival. Whereas what's at stake with flowers is like a meaning, a purpose, of of us, of we, like we, um, love, community, beauty. Um, uh, that's important to protect. And or what are we without that? Um, uh, so that's pretty intriguing and I think illuminating, um, about um, how the different perspectives we can bring on our toward our defining our identity and defining value. And I think they correspond more or less to that, this binary that we've been talking about all along, right brain, left brain, sort of childlike, intuitive, exploratory, um, living in the moment. This is um, versus the exploitation of known formula for profit maximization, adult um, strategizing. Um, so on the one hand, we understand why, like, guns are effective, and what they protect. Um, that's something we can define, like, uh, objectively, account for, prove in some objective way. Um, what flowers protect is, again, takes a leap of faith that it's not objectively defensible. You have to believe in flowers. You have to believe in the value of community and so forth that they represent. It's one of those things, if you have to ask, you'll never know. Um, it's a performative criterion of value. You perform what it means to be a member of a community by recognizing the value of flowers. Um, so I think this goes back to the issues Nicola was talking about last time. The contrast and adventure narratives generally, because adventure narratives are about that interactive, more childlike, exploratory, um, self-discovery, discovering yourself through interaction with the world, um, and surprise, self-invention. You remember Nicola said the knight doesn't know who he is. He's going out into the world to find out. The world will show him. Um, and that's in contrast to kind of the mechanical stasis of the peasant that just is there just to work, and there's no exploration involved, but just sort of a mechanical function. Um, so adventure narratives, like art generally, are crucial to negotiating who we are, defining who we are. We tell stories about becoming, growing, in order to um, test and communicate, you know, meaning in value in qualitative rather than strictly quantifiable terms. Um, but again, it's the, like Nicola was saying about the knight's tale. A good knight is what a good knight does. It's a functional definition, not an objective definition. So we're always like metaphors for ourselves. We're always demonstrating the meaning that we would fulfill in our lives. Um, so that's, I think, the crucial role of metaphors in our reality, in living living a human life, and so that's why I'm uh, spending time in this class on nonfiction, showing the importance of metaphor to telling what human lives are really like. That the human life is, has the quality and meaning that it does, because of our belief in fictions in a way. So there's that paradox is built into it, that the non-fiction reality of our lives is a pursuit of like fictional meaning, collective cultural projects. So a paradox, another paradox to consider, and that has to do with the legacy of colonialism, is that okay, like meaning, human meanings, culture, it's about flowers, not guns. But it's sort of a coincidence that the dominant culture also has the most guns. So, um, th- so that's what I've been talking about, like this legacy, intertwined legacy. To what extent is adventure narrative really exploring what independent value, or to beyond a qualitative value, that just exists in metaphors, a cultural transmission of uh, metaphors, dreams, of human purpose. And to what extent is it just rationalizing or disguising, suppressing the dominance of uh, guns, violence, coercive power, money, just quantifiable value that gets dressed up in the disguise of human meaning. Um, uh, that's an important question. We're reading these stories about white people going on adventures in nature and discovering themselves in nature, um, and that is uh, a formula that has traditionally served to justify kind of um, uh, actual colonial exploitation, just like we were talking about in Hawaii. Um, so that's, I hope that's clear, and um, I want to point it out. I mean, what I'm pointing out is what Ta-nehisi Coates called the dream. Like these are privileged. These are stories, adventure stories of basically the people, members of the privileged class, um, pursuing their dream of self-realization, um, and uh, I guess I want to interrogate, or at least throw the question out there for you to reflect on. Um, is this the dream that Ta-nehisi Coates was talking about, that ignores its violent costs? or if not, like how are these narratives trying to grapple with the um, uh, hidden costs of self, um, uh, you know, first world dreams of self realization and self discovery in nature. So I'm going to answer my own question, in a couple different ways. Um, First, I want to notice that it kind of overlaps with the classic soliloquy of Hamlet's. On the one hand, we're this, most amazing species. It can empathize with, virtually, not just any other individual person, but populations, other species. We can empathize with the whole planet, nature, um, uh, sacrifice ourselves for this empathy with the whole rest of the world. Um, but equally, we can reduce the whole rest of the world to a kind of mechanical, indifferent, objective, quantifiable value in a way that's really deadly. Um, so this contrast is something that Hamlet addresses in this famous soliloquy. What a piece of work is man! How noble in reason, how infinite in faculty and form and moving, how express and admirable in action, how like an angel, in apprehension, how like a god, the beauty of the world, the paragon of animals. And yet, to me, what is this quintessence of dust? Um, so I feel like he's registering um, those two aspects um, of human, civilization. On the one hand, just uh, um, a kind of pinnacle of achievement in nature, not hierarchically, not in a hierarchical sense, but in a sense of uh, complexity and diversity, adaptability, variability. Um, so I, a pinnacle of in terms of the richness of diversity of human experience um, uh, and expression. Um, uh, the this complexity is something singular in the world. Um, and it because it's an appreciation of what natural diversity is for and is about, and it's appreciation of that value, the radical value of or that value of radical uniqueness, that we are capable of that, and love of the unique things just for being what they are. Uh, I that 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 seems like that's a value precisely because it's not a generalizing value, and that's what the other side of human civilization has also produced, which is massively reductive. This quintessence of dust, that we have created also a culture in which everything has a price. I mean, it's kind of sick to say and to acknowledge that, but it's kind of impossible to refute that we live in a world now where everything does have a price, where people are expendable. And I mean, I think pandemic has only made that more evident. How um, dispensable uh, uh, some people are, and uh, how the kind of operation of the economy, the the stock market, keep, pursuit of economic value has priority over um, lives in lots of different respects. Um, so this massively reductive, generalizable, quantification of meaning and purpose on the one hand, um, but on the other hand, this I think singular appreciation for the infinite. William Blake's idea of the world in a grain of sand. That human culture also has produced this capacity to find infinite value in every particular thing. Um, so, and another thing to point out about this passage here in Hamlet is that he's depressed. He's talking about being depressed, and I think that's maybe some value that we can think about in these texts that we're reading is these. Um, they address experiences of extreme disillusionment with society, extreme alienation, painful alienation, and find a kind of wisdom and illuminating insight through that, depression. So I think that's one thing to notice here. Um, he's talking really explicitly about being depressed. I have of late, but wherefore I know not, lost all my mirth, foregone all custom of exercises, and indeed it goes so heavily with my disposition that this goodly frame, the earth, seems to me a sterile promontory, this most excellent canopy, the air, this brave overhanging firmament, this majestical roof fretted with golden fire, why it appears no other thing to me than a foul and pestilent congregation of vapors. um, so he's depressed. He's talking about the world being drained of meaning in a way that's pathological. That's like a mood disorder, and he's presenting it that way. But it's also an insight into the truth. And that's something I think that you might just consider in reading these books, is that they're not totally absorbed in the dream. They're alienated, sickened by it, maybe as well, and that experience of sickness has an illuminating aspect to it. The other thing I want to point out here is this is a transitional moment in the play, because when he says "man delights not me," Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are here, and they kind of chuckle, and he says, what are you laughing about? Well, they said, well, that's too bad, because the actors just came to town and they're going to put on a play. And Hamlet immediately brightens up. The actors, theater, like that gives me purpose. Like art, the imagination, communicating, stories that reminds me what human meaning is imagining human meaning. This scene points out the crucial function of art in transmitting human meaning, and so going back to the question of adventure narratives, that's a crucial point about what they're for, is communicating dreams of adventure as much as actual conquest, and so keeping that distinction in mind is really crucial too. So we can have another cognitive science perspective on the value of art, imagination versus actual conquest, possession. So this is extremely informative about why and how we experience reward, gratification. So check this out.
For a TV, the world is thinking.
This monkey has been trained that when the little light comes on, it's one of those sessions where I can now get food, and it knows that if I press this lever 10 times, after a little bit of a delay, I'll get some food. If I press the lever 10 more times, I'll get some more food. It understands the task. So what do we have here? We have first a signal, the light coming on, saying it's one of those sessions. We're starting one of those. Then the monkey does the work, and then with a delay, it gets the reward. And what everyone initially thought was dopamine would go up after the reward. That's not when it goes up. It goes up when the signal comes on. What's this? This is the monkey there sitting and saying, I know this. I know the drill. I know this. I'm on top of this. This is going to be great. I know what I do now. This is completely perfect. 100% I'm going for today. Dopamine is not about pleasure. It's about the anticipation of pleasure. It's about the pursuit of happiness rather than happiness itself. And what's most remarkable is experimentally, if you block that rise of dopamine from occurring, you don't get the work, you don't get the behavior. This is not only the anticipation, but this is what is capable of eliciting goal-directed behavior. Amazing elaboration on this, which now begins to tell us something real familiar. Okay, so in this study, elaboration, rather than this design, you press the lever the right number of times, you get reward. Do the work, you get a reward 100% of the time. That's how it works. Now instead shift to where you get the reward only 50% of the time. You do the work, and only about half the time you get the reward. So what happens to dopamine levels there? This is what they do. They go through the roof. Because what have you just done? You've introduced the word maybe into the equation. And maybe is addictive like nothing else out there. Because the light comes on, and you're doing the, I know how this works. This is going to be great, but I screwed up last time because I didn't get the food. But this time I'm feeling good today, but I'm a total screw up. And I'm inadequate in junior high school, and it was terrible. But maybe this time this is my lucky day. And just vacillating all over the place. What we see here is dopamine comes pouring out like mad. It's the uncertainty of the reward. And here's the really elegant thing they did in that study. Now, instead of a 50% reward rate, either 25% or 75%. These are diametrically opposite states. Worse news, better news. The only thing they have in common is you've decreased the level of unpredictability, and the rise in dopamine winds up being halfway between the 50% and the 100. And what's this about? This is the world of brilliant social engineering by humans, say, in Las Vegas, who understand how to design a place to take a curve where somebody has a gazillionth of 1% chance of getting a reward and making you think because it's the special day in this casino, and you especially are so much tilted to the right that you are going to get, and humans are profoundly manipulable in this realm. And it turns out so are other species, the exact same neurochemistry. So what winds up being unique about us? And what you see is, with humans, it's the time dimension. You get the signal, you do the work, you get the reward. And the question becomes, how much time, lag time, can there be between the work and the reward to still elicit the behavior, to still get the work coming out? And we have just entered uniquely human terrain there for the very simple reason that probably most of us recognize, which is somewhere along the way, almost all of us worked very hard in school to get good SAT scores, to get into a good college, to get GREs, to get into a good grad school, to get a good job, to get in the nursing home of our choice there, sort of thing. And what we see is this astonishing ability of humans to keep those dopamine levels up for decades and decades, waiting for the reward. And in the most bizarre, unique realm of this in humans, sometimes we could maintain it with a belief system where the reward doesn't come in our lifetime. The reward comes after our death. The reward comes in our afterlife. The reward comes unto the next generations. And there's no monkey out there who's willing to lever press all the time because of what St. Peter's going to think somewhere down the line. So that is unique about us.
So I think that's pretty amazing how concretely it corroborates in terms of neurochemistry the distinction we've been discussing between value as something quantifiable and possessible, and a discrete objective reward that you can have and know you have, versus the cultural communication of ideals, purposes, meanings that you don't own, but that you communicate through your behavior, and you through your behavior you receive social recognition for the meanings that you're pursuing. But this is a disconnect in our culture, right? That we're told we think we do things in order to get the reward, in order to get the money, or whatever. We think that's why we're doing it, and so we're racing. This is the rat race. We're always racing after these things we think we want, we think will make us happy, but they never do, and so we're failing to recognize the real source of meaning, which is the social recognition of our purposes and pursuits. And I don't think that it's mysterious why I think this dissatisfaction makes us very productive. We're perpetually dissatisfied. That I think produces a lot of work, but unsatisfying, unexpressive work. Here's another example. I think a really powerful example of this distinction. I'm trying to give you various illustrations of the idea that cultural meaning is a collective project in pursuit of and negotiation of purposes and meanings that have the value they do, precisely because we don't receive them. We don't own them, but we can reflect them through our work. They're always at a distance. They're always so we receive the value only to the extent that our aims, our ostensible objectives and goals are never quite entirely achieved and owned. Once they get owned, we lose their capacity to mediate that social recognition, that pursuit, and expression through work. Check this out. This is a brilliant little animated video about the kiwi bird, a bird that is unable to fly. So I'd love to, it's a little fable. I'd love to hear what you think of it. Yeah, I think it's totally brilliant. And it's quite, I think, a powerful like allegory of human, meaning, human pursuit of meaning in culture. Um, uh, it's, Kiwi bird can't fly, but it's pursuing this. It's constructing a world around that dream of flying. Um, I think that's quite analogous to us. We dream. We have a dream of being free, self-determining people. We have dreams of love, and all sorts of things that maybe the real world can't entirely accommodate, that aren't entirely realistic. But we work after them, we go after them, and it's the work um, in pursuit of this dream um, that makes life meaningful. One of the brilliant things I think about that little video is the representation of time. So we see at just a moment of the bird and how he does one tree, rappels down and nails one tree to the cliff. So that's the present. We see his work in the present. But then we get that shot down the cliff and we see all these other trees, and oh my gosh, he's been doing this for years. So it's a picture of a life, like a long past is represented, a life devoted to this project. and then then he jumps. And what's cool, so there are two aspects to the jump that I think that are interesting. It could be that I'm totally overanalyzing this little video, but I don't think so. I think it's amazing. um, so one is obviously that he falls to his death, um, he or she, um, uh, you know. So that's something to think about. This is suicide mission. Um, but the other thing that I think is interesting is it could be it's surreal. The way it's shot is surreal. We get a shot of the bird going down, but then the camera tilts and it makes the vertical cliff appear horizontal. That's to say, we get a surreal, a picture. What the film is representing is no longer reality, but the dream itself. We're entering into the dream vision of flying. This is the vision that the Kiwi has been pursuing all these years. So that's what's cool about it. We get these different representations of time, the past, the present, and then the vision that he's been pursuing. Um, and I just think that lays out sort of the parameters of life pretty clearly. Um, and also, that I think this juxtaposition of this surreal vision of flight, of whatever the fantasy of love or freedom or whatever the ideal that you're pursuing in life. I think the point of the surreal construction of that vision in the film is that it is a surreal fantasy that we can evoke through art, through the technology of art, distorting and rearranging reality. But to the extent we want to hold on to it and actually have it, there's something deadly about that. That's a suicide mission in some way. And another detail that's amazing is the way the bird closes its eyes. It's sort of, he's put all this work into constructing this vision, and then in the end, he doesn't even need to see it. And then it's like, does he shed a tear, or it just is so beautifully made, and the music was amazing. Um, so I think this is characteristic of artwork in general. The way in which art represents human meaning tends to have these temporal dimensions to it, to evoke this project that Robert Sapolsky was talking about. The gratification comes in the work, the anticipation of happiness, of pursuing a certain goal, rather than just the acquisition of the reward. Art communicates our pursuit of meaning. It transmits dreams, rather than transmitting acquired concrete value. I think these issues might be helpful in terms of reading the ending of Cheryl Strayed's Wild, and how she addresses, I think, the kind of the question of the happy end, what makes her story, I don't know, categorized as a triumph or a success or a happy end. So we want to look at a couple different things. One is in terms of sort of romantic relationships. That's sort of a through line in Wild, is her divorce and relationship with men. And I feel like that's really one of the most powerful dimensions of the book. Um, I think it's interesting. Uh, in more than one way, I think the the question of romantic success, how we define our personal success in terms of romantic success, what's the role of romantic success, maybe particularly for women, in terms of personal success. Cheryl Strayed's story, in any event, I think she struggled with sort of need to legitimate herself through her relationships and through sexual relationships. Um, and just going back to the way in which adventure stories, or stories of conquest, can kind of serve to disguise uh, kind of mechanized, quantifiable value. I think it's also true that our satisfaction, there's a certain kind of satisfaction for readers, or in movies, that comes from romantic consummation of romance in one way or another. The happy end is about the lovers coming together. There's a kind of gratification in that. Conquest, or consummation, and I think that's something to be skeptical of. It's sort of the Hollywood dream of um, uh, happiness or love that can make you miserable if you expect to find it in real life. That's to say, if you expect to find something so conclusive and definitively achieved. Um, uh, so I want to show you the end of a movie called Boyhood, that I think is really brilliant in the way it plays on that expectation of consummation. So uh, this is um, very typical of this director. He ends many of his movies with a scene of beginning, um, of dawn, kind of new chapters. The opening of a new chapter is how he ends.
Dalton can be crazy sometimes.
He seems cool though.
Yeah. Yeah, they're both really cool. How are you feeling?
Great. Pretty great, to be honest.
Good. I'm really happy that you're hanging out with us.
Yeah. Me too.
This moment's having a multiple orgasm. It's like as if all of time has unfolded before us so we could stand here and look out and scream, fuck yeah!
You know how everyone's always saying, seize the moment? I don't know. I'm kind of thinking it's the other way around. Like the moment seizes us.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. It's constant. The moments, it's like it's always right now,
Yeah.
I think it's a pretty compelling question to reflect on what's the difference between seizing the moment and having the moment seize you. I think it defines this juxtaposition that we've been talking about. I think the thing about seizing the moment is it assumes in advance that you know who you are, you know why you're seizing the moment, you're using the moment, you're exploiting the moment for a value that you already know in advance. And so in the end, I wonder if the story that we're seeing repeated over and over again is how that repetition, that mechanization of life, that we know what we're going to get out of it. We're just trying to maximize the return on our investment. Sounds like self-assertion or self-expression, self-realization, but it ends up turning the self into kind of impersonal mechanism, emptying it of meaning. It's like purchasing a kind of receipt, a kind of guarantee or warranty of meaning. I achieved this or that. I achieved some kind of value that I can quantify in terms of money, or I don't know, romance. I've kind of acquired something that I can prove it in some kind of concrete way. That drains the kind of personal value of the experience by reducing it to this known quantity. On the other hand, though, saying that the moment seizes you, that what you, I think, preserves a kind of qualitative uniqueness of the experience. But at the cost of uncertainty, it doesn't have the status of a generalizable normative value. The way these understood quantities, however you want to quantify romance, romantic conquest, or monetary earning wins. Just think about that scene, like you feel like there's kind of an anticipation that they're going to kiss, and that's going to be like a consummation of story, kind of certifying a happy end. But it's interesting to think what we get instead. We get this kind of awkward moment of like looking back and forth. And I guess I want to suggest that there's a qualitative, what I was calling before, fine-grained detail to the experience, precisely because that consummation, that expected cashing out of the experience into a known value of an achievement of a certain kind of recognizable, generalizable value, that's withheld. And so all we have is sort of the awkward idiosyncratic detail of the particular experience. Just because we've resisted, we've deferred that gratification. And so that's what I think Robert Sapolsky is saying. That's what valuable experience is about being in that moment before the reward. But that's not what our achievement, accomplishment culture is rewards or valorizes, prioritizes. So I think that's a way in which our culture kind of plays a little bit of a con job on us, valorizing these achievements that keep us racing after gratification, but it kind of misdirecting us. It kind of diverting us from where our focus should actually be. So here's a scene towards the end of Wild that it feels kind of an analogous scene. You might expect a kind of romantic consummation happening. But it's a moment of kind of coming to terms with herself, coming to terms with her divorce, and finding a kind of independence, sense of herself, independent of valorization through romance. So I felt a kind of acceptance that we were no longer married, kind of clarity, where there had been so much uncertainty. She's riding in the back of this truck with these three guys, the young bucks, as she calls them, and has a crush on one of them that's she thinks is kind of reciprocated. And so here's how the scene plays out. The four of us lay wedged in across the futon's expanse as the trunk bumped over the dark roads. Me, Rick, Josh, and Ricky, in that order across the truck's bed. There wasn't an inch to spare, just as it had been on the deranged ranger's couch the night before. The side of Rick's body was pressed against mine, ever so slightly tilted in my direction and away from Josh. The sky had finally cleared, and I could see the almost full moon. Look, I said just to Rick, gesturing toward the window of the camper at the sky. We spoke quietly of the moons we'd seen on the trail and where we'd been when we'd seen them, and of the trail ahead. You'll have to give me Lisa's number so we can hang out in Portland, he said. I'll be living there too after I finish the trail. Absolutely, we'll hang out, I said. For sure, he said, and looked at me in this delicate way that made me swoon. Though I realized that in spite of the fact that I liked him perhaps 1,000 times more than a good number of the people I'd slept with, I wasn't going to lay a hand on him, no matter how deeply I longed to. Laying a hand on him was as far away as the moon, and it wasn't just because he was younger than me or because two of his friends were in bed with us, pressed up against his very back. It was because for once it was finally enough for me to simply lie there in a restrained and chaste rapture beside a sweet, strong, sexy, smart, good man who was probably never meant to be anything but my friend. For once I didn't ache for a companion. For once the phrase, a woman with a hole in her heart, didn't thunder into my head. That phrase didn't even live for me anymore. I'm really glad I met you, I said. Me too, said Rick. Who wouldn't be glad to meet the queen of the PCT? I smiled at him and turned to gaze out the little window at the moon again, intensely aware of the side of his body so warm against mine as we lay together in an exquisitely conscious silence. Very nice, said Rick after a while. Very nice, he repeated with more emphasis the second time. What is? I asked, turning to him, though I knew. Everything, he said, and it was true. So I just want to point out the correlation with a kind of irresolution with so a little bit of a narrative frustration. The narrative didn't resolve into some kind of satisfying achievement, or just resolution of this romantic tension between these two. But that frustration or incompleteness is correlated with a new kind of attentiveness, just an openness to experience, paying attention to details, being seized by the moment, and an openness to growth and development and possibility that is, I think, closer to what actually is rewarding and interesting and engaging for people, rather than this perpetual pursuit of the same thing that actually never turns out the way it's supposed to. This happy end of one sort of or another.